Welcome to the Man of Recaps. This is Arrested Development Season 4. Michael Bluth had finally decided to bail on his dysfunctional family when the feds came for his mother, who hijacked the Queen Mary to escape, but it didn't go so well. Hilariously, this makes her case fall under maritime law, which is a throwback joke to Seasons 1 through 3. But Michael is all the way done. He sells his shares of the Bluth Company to Lucille too, and finally finishes development on Sudden Valley with his own company, but as we'll see, it doesn't go so well. Buster is missing his mother, and things start to get weird. Luckily, she's allowed out under house arrest until her trial, so they fall back into their old routine. George Bluth meets with longtime rival Stan Sitwell and does some corporate espionage to find out that they've been contracted to build a wall between the United States and Mexico. The Bluths want that business for themselves. Conveniently, George's twin brother Oscar owns a bunch of land on the US-Mexico border where he and his hippie friends like to eat the maca root. So George buys the land from his brother, and while they're still waiting on the wall project, he starts Father B's Sweat and Squeeze. It's a fake leadership seminar where he gets rich businessmen into the sweat lodge and then sells them exorbitantly overpriced lemonade. Of course, Father B's fine because it's his twin brother Oscar who's doing the sweating. Now, George Michael punched his uncle Job because Job stole George Michael's girlfriend, Anne. He accidentally proposes to her, so at the wedding, he's going to do a grand magic trick, illusion, but it's also a real escape because he's trying to bail on the wedding. Unfortunately, he can't get his handcuffs off and finds himself trapped in the rock and disappears for real. Eventually, though, he is found. Lindsay Bluth found out she is adopted, and also her husband Tobias is very gay. So, disillusioned with her life, she travels to India for some spiritual awakening. Mostly, though, just does some shopping. And Tobias is also ready for a new start, which he spells like this. And unbeknownst to each other, they both go on the same India trip. When they get back to fix their marriage, they decide to buy a gigantic house they can't afford, which works out really well until the housing market crash, which is also bad news for Michael Bluth. With Sudden Valley a complete failure, Michael moves into his son George Michael's college dorm room, but it's a little crowded in there, so Michael devises an elaborate scheme to vote out George Michael's other roommate, P-Hound. His only miscalculation was that his son doesn't want him there, so he's the one voted out. Now it's Lucille's trial, and per usual, none of the family shows up, so she's sent to a resort-style prison where she quickly becomes the Queen Bee. Without his mother around, Buster rejoins the army. They make him a drone operator, which he's very good at, until in a horrible crash, he loses his hand again, and they give him a giant robot hand. Still wanting to be an actor, Tobias goes to the Method 1 acting clinic, which of course is a methadone clinic. He meets former drug addict Debris Bardot, which he recognizes as an actress from the knockoff Fantastic Four and also the porn series Straight Bait. Her boyfriend is Marky Bark, an environmental activist that is just Lindsay's theoretical type. The couples go on a double date where Lindsay falls for Marky, but he lives on an ostrich farm with his mom, which is unacceptable, so Lindsay takes him and the ostrich to her mom's penthouse. Tobias falls for Debris and tries to reignite her acting career. Unfortunately, they're continually fined because they don't have the rights to Fantastic Four. Tobias goes back to the model home, which is now being used as a To Catch a Predator house, and because he says things like this,
"Daddy needs to get his rocks off,"
he is arrested as a sexual predator. Job makes friends with young superstar singer Mark Cherry and joins his entourage. It's a wild blur of partying, which comes with a lot of shame, so Job starts taking his famous forget-me-nows, which are just roofies, but forgetting he already took one the day before, he ends up in a vicious roofie cycle. They call Job Getaway because he's basically their limo driver, and when Mark Cherry gets sick of him, he tries to kick him out with the song Get Away, but Job doesn't get it. George Michael also getting into music. You may remember he is an incredible woodblock player, and he creates a woodblock app called Fake Block. His cousin Maybe, you remember she conned her way into being a Hollywood producer, but she's fired when they realize she never graduated high school, and turns out she's not very good at high school, so she gets George Michael to tutor her. Seeing her again reignites his cousin crush, and when she mistakenly thinks that Fake Block is a very impressive internet privacy software, he decides to just go with it. Down near Mexico, George Sr. finally tries some maca root and has a spirit vision where a shaman puts a curse on him. Of course, it was actually just Marky Bark, but 1 year later, the curse has come true. George finds his testosterone is gone, and his twin brother Oscar is now more virile than ever. He starts sleeping with Lucille again, and Lucille too. Lucille too is running for Congress against Herbert Love, played by Terry Crews. George needs to convince Herbert Love to support the border wall. Turns out Lindsay's there too because Marky Bark is going to glitter bomb Herbert Love in protest. She got a $50,000 check to Maybe from Gangy for facelift, which she thinks is her mother paying for her daughter's plastic surgery, but is really her movie royalties. George takes the check and pays off Herbert Love to support the wall, only later to realize the land he bought from Oscar was on the wrong side of the border. It's in Mexico. Job is there too to sabotage longtime rival Tony Wonder, who has now rebranded himself as the Gay Magician. He thinks it was Tony who sabotaged his last trick, so when he sees a podium full of glitter, he wedges that shut, but boom, that was actually Marky Bark's podium. So he blew himself, and luckily he's face blind, so Lindsay's able to ditch him. She flirts with Herbert Love, and they start dating. She wants to get him against the wall, though, and she kind of succeeds. His campaign manager thinks that she's a prostitute, though, and that maybe is her pimp, so free money, she decides to go with it. The cousins were there because maybe's getting a movie award, but to impress people, she talks up the fact that she's working with Fake Block, the hot new internet company. This impresses actress Rebel Alley, and so George Michael keeps going with it and gives her the fake name George Maharis. Maybe starts promoting Fake Block a little too well, and pretty soon the fake company has very real investors. Michael finally made good on his threat to start a new life in Phoenix, only to realize it is ungodly hot there and no one should live in the desert. So Michael comes back home, he gets a job with Google, driving one of their mapping cars, but soon he gets a call from Kitty, his dad's old secretary, who is now Ron Howard's secretary. He's the narrator, by the way. He wants to do a movie about the Bluth family and needs Michael to get all the release forms signed. Outside he runs into actress Rebel Alley and claims to be a big shot producer, so they start dating. Due to a misunderstanding, he thinks she's Ron Howard's mistress, but later awkwardly finds out it's Ron Howard's daughter. But Rebel's also interested in internet billionaire George Maharis, so they start dating too. When Michael finds out there's another guy, he does some snooping and realizes he's dating the same girl as his own son. Tobias is now a registered sex offender, but he's let out of prison to be the therapist at Lucille 2's rehab clinic, where he reconnects with his lost love, Debris, and decides that the best way to rehab is to put on a Fantastic Four musical. But they need money to buy the rights, so Lucille 2 calls in the $700,000 debt that Michael owes her. So Michael gets Job to help him sell these houses, but that's very difficult because the neighborhood's so far from any schools or playgrounds, which is perfect for a certain demographic, and Sudden Valley becomes a haven for sex offenders. Speaking of sex offenders, Job pretends to be gay so he can get revenge on Tony Wonder. His plan is to make Tony fall in love with him, then break his heart, but turns out these two guys have a lot in common. Same. One thing they have in common is that neither is actually gay, but they agree to have a gay sex date on the Cinco de Quatro. Now, as a disabled vet, Buster was adopted by Herbert Love to compete with his opponent Lucille 2, but when his wife finds out her husband's been seeing a prostitute, she has revenge sex with Buster, but Herbert Love calls it off with Lindsay and his wife dumps Buster, so Buster uses his monster hands to knock him out of the race. They need someone to run in his place, so Lindsay gets up there and accidentally runs for Congress. Her ex-boyfriend Marky Bark was gonna glitter bomb Herbert Love again, but due to a mix-up, he and Tobias end up going to the Fantastic Four float, and they mess that up anyway. Michael Bluth is there to try to pay off his debt to Lucille 2 with sexual favors, but she rejects him because he's not worth $700,000. But later that night, Lucille 2 is found murdered, or maybe just missing, and for funny interconnected reasons, every single member of the Bluth family had some motive to kill her, but Buster's the one who's caught on the security tape. He visits his nephew to use his privacy software to erase the footage. Of course, all it does is just play some sick woodblock beats. Job runs into his almost wife Anne, who has a young child now, but it's not his, it's actually from a one-night stand with Tony Wonder. Job devises an elaborate scheme where they have sex to get revenge on Tony, but Anne convinces Tony to have sex with her to get revenge on Job, but then Anne bails and the two guys end up having sex with each other, which was what they wanted in the first place. And Michael is there the next morning to see who Job is with, so Job feeds him a forget-me-now, and Michael wakes up with no memory of the day before. He decides he wants to get more serious with Rebel, but George Michael's already there, and father and son bump into each other on the way out and realize they've been dating the same girl. It's a funny, awkward situation until he realizes his dad knew that he was dating Rebel, so he punches his dad in the face, and that's how season 4 comes to an end.